Imagine this, inside a place called home, the place that should be the safest. 13 children were chained to their beds, starving, trapped in filth, hidden away from the world. For years, no one knew. It became known as the House of Horrors, and the truth only came to light after one desperate escape on a cold January night in 2018. This is the shocking story of the Turpin family in Paris, California. David and Louise Turpin looked like a picture-perfect couple. Family photos on Facebook, matching outfits, smiling faces. But behind closed doors was a nightmare few could imagine. Children starved until their bodies withered, shackled for weeks at a time, allowed to bathe only once a year, living every day in fear. Everything changed because of a brave 17-year-old girl, Jordan Turpin, who risked her life to escape and call 911. That phone call didn't just save her, it saved all 12 of her siblings and exposed one of the most disturbing family crimes in American history.
911 emergency, what are you reporting?
Hello?
This is 911, do you have an emergency?
I just went away from home because I live in a family of 15, okay? Can you hear me? And we have abusing parents. Did you hear that?
Okay, how did they abuse you?
Okay. They hit us, they throw us across the room. They pull our hair, they yank out our hair. I have my two little sisters right now are chained up.
They looked perfect. David and Louise Turpin were not the kind of parents you'd expect to be hiding a nightmare. On the surface, they were clean-cut, church-going, and respectable. Every photo told the same story. 13 children, all dressed alike. The same smiles, the same posture. Matching dresses for the girls, suits and ties for the boys. Lined up in rows like a postcard from another era. On Facebook, those pictures painted the image of a happy, well-disciplined family. Birthdays were celebrated. Trips were documented. There were even pictures from Disneyland. Children in Mickey Mouse shirts, parents beaming proudly behind them. To a casual observer, it looked like the Turpins had everything under control. Some relatives and acquaintances even admired them. 13 kids and still so organized, they thought. In church circles, the Turpins were sometimes described as a devout Christian family, unusual in size but admirable in discipline. At one point, the family was even mentioned in local news, shown as a quirky but devoted household, different from the modern world but not dangerous. But those smiles were not real. They were rehearsed. The pictures were posed. The truth was that the children were not smiling because they were happy. They were smiling because they had no choice. Behind the photos was fear. The reality inside that home was nothing like the glossy images posted online. Neighbors rarely saw the children. The house always seemed too quiet for a home with 13 kids. When they did notice something, it was odd. A thin face peeking from an upstairs window, curtains twitching, shadows moving inside, but no one ever playing in the yard. One neighbor later said in an interview,
"We thought it was strange. You'd expect to hear laughter, kids running around, but in that house, nothing. Just silence."
The lawn stayed neat but lifeless. No bicycles, no toys scattered outside, no sound of children playing. When curious neighbors asked about it, Louise had ready-made answers.
"Oh, I homeschool them. I just don't want bad influences from outside. It's better this way."
And in a conservative town, that explanation didn't raise alarms. Plenty of families homeschooled, plenty of parents were strict. So people accepted the mask. They assumed this family was simply private, maybe eccentric, maybe overly strict, but not abusive. The Turpins wanted people to think their house was a fortress of faith and discipline. In truth, it was a prison. David Turpin had a stable career. He worked as an engineer and, on paper, provided for his family. He drove a new car, wore clean suits, and carried himself like a man in control. Louise took pride in her role as the devoted mother. She liked the attention that came with having so many children. When relatives questioned why the kids were always dressed the same, she said it was because she wanted them to look neat and unified. When people asked why they never saw the kids outside, she said she preferred to keep them close, that the world was too dangerous. The story seemed to check out. Even extended family members who visited didn't see the full truth. They saw rows of thin children standing stiffly, whispering only when told to. But the matching clothes and the quiet behavior were explained away as strict parenting. Some relatives later confessed,
"It felt off. They looked so skinny, so pale. But Louise kept saying they were fine. I didn't know what to think. I thought maybe they were just different."
The Turpins were careful. They showed the world just enough to avoid suspicion. David's job title, the family photos, the religious talk, it all added up to a convincing mask. But inside the house, the children were suffering. The contrast between appearance and reality could not be greater. Behind the smiles on Facebook, the children were wasting away. They were denied food, allowed to eat only once a day, sometimes less. They were given frozen dinners or scraps, while their parents ate fast food in front of them. They were chained to beds for weeks at a time. They bathed once a year, if that. The smell of filth filled the rooms. When relatives did stop by, the children hardly spoke. They were trained to be silent, to avoid eye contact, to look obedient. If they slipped up, punishment followed as soon as the doors closed. On the outside, people thought the Turpins were strange but harmless. Inside, they were running a house of torment. And yet, David and Louise believed they had full control. They thought their mask was unbreakable. They believed no one would ever see past the photos, the staged vacations, the words about discipline and faith. But a mask can only last so long. The facade was so carefully built, but the reality was too dark to stay hidden forever. While the world saw the Turpins as a model Christian family in matching clothes, the truth was already eating away at the inside of that house. The children were starving. Their bodies were fragile, their growth stunted. Their skin was pale from lack of sunlight. They whispered to each other in secret, dreaming of freedom. Neighbors noticed the windows that were always closed. Relatives felt uneasy about how thin the kids looked. But no one acted. No one dug deeper. It took one desperate act of courage, one 17-year-old girl who could no longer live under the mask, to expose the truth. And when the truth finally broke through, the world could no longer look at those smiling photos the same way again. The Turpins fooled everyone. For years they convinced relatives, neighbors, even local media that they were something to admire. A big, disciplined religious family raising children in a strict but loving home. The Turpin family looked perfect on the outside. Matching clothes, smiling photos, birthday cakes, even Disneyland trips. To outsiders, they were strict but loving parents, raising 13 children under one roof. But behind those smiling photos, this is what life inside the Turpin house really looked like. Inside those locked doors was not a happy family. It was a prison. A house where laughter didn't exist, where hunger never ended. And every day, the children lived in silence, waiting for the nightmare to end. For many of the Turpin children, chains were part of daily life. Not metaphorical chains, real, heavy chains wrapped around their wrists and ankles, locked to bed frames. If one of them dared to take food without permission, the punishment was swift. If they whispered when they weren't allowed, they were shackled. If they disobeyed even the smallest rule, the chains came out. Some were kept tied for days, others for weeks. The metal dug into their skin, leaving raw wounds.
Sometimes I still have nightmares of things that had happened, such as my siblings being chained up or getting beaten.
at night, they cried quietly, not from hunger, but from the pain of iron coming into their bodies. One child later told the court,
"Parents took my whole life from me, but now I'm taking my life back."
"Imagine being a child and watching your brother tied to a bed, unable to move, while your parents walk past like nothing is wrong. Imagine knowing that if you spoke out, you could be next." Violence was constant. Beatings came with belts, with fists, with whatever was within reach. The children learned to stay still, to stay silent, because any movement could bring pain. The house was not a home. It was a place of fear, where chains rattled louder than any laughter. Food became the sharpest weapon of control. Meals were rare and meager. Moldy bread, rotten vegetables, cold leftovers. Sometimes, nothing at all. The children lived with stomachs that never felt full. Hunger was their normal. At night, they whispered about food, describing tastes they had never even experienced. Cheeseburgers, pizza, ice cream. For them, these weren't snacks, they were dreams. Meanwhile, David and Louise ate well. They bought fast food for themselves, enjoying it in front of their children. They watched their sons and daughters stare, begging silently for a bite, and denied them. The house reeked of filth. Children were rarely allowed to bathe, sometimes once a year, sometimes less. Their hair matted with grease, their skin covered in dirt. Clothes were never washed. Some wore the same outfit for months until the fabric hardened from sweat and grime. The smell inside was unbearable. Human waste in the corners of the rooms, dirty sheets, rotting food. Windows were shut tight, trapping it all inside. It was deliberate degradation, meant to strip the children of any sense of dignity. The abuse went beyond hunger and filth. The children were robbed of something more fundamental, their very sense of self. They weren't allowed to attend school. They weren't taught properly at home. Most couldn't read or write beyond the simplest words. They didn't understand math, history, or even the basics of the world around them. Even worse, many didn't know how old they were. Birthdays were ignored. Time passed, but in their minds, it stood still. A teenager of 17 could believe she was 13.
Family of 15 people, and my parents are abusing. They abuse us, and my two little sisters right now are chained up.
Imagine the confusion, being old enough to feel grown but too controlled to know your own age. Every measure of identity, time, education, growth was stripped away. The shackles, the hunger, the filth, all of it was enforced with fear. But the strongest weapon David and Louise used was psychological. They convinced the children that everything happening was God's will, that obedience was holy, that suffering was part of their duty. If they disobeyed, they weren't just breaking rules, they were sinning. That message sank deep. Even when some of the older children began to realize what was happening was wrong, they were terrified to act. They believed punishment would be eternal, not just from their parents, but from God. Louise often reminded them to smile in family photos, to stay silent if anyone asked questions, to act obedient. The children complied, out of fear, out of conditioning, out of survival. And so, they lived in silence. They carried chains not just on their bodies, but in their minds. Picture this scene. 13 children, thin and pale, trapped inside 4 filthy walls. The smell of waste, the sound of chains, hunger gnawing at their stomachs, fear tightening their throats. Day after day, night after night, the same routine. Shackled, starving, silent. Neighbors outside saw nothing. Relatives believed the lies.
Late at night.
I'd come home at anywhere from 12:30 to 3 in the morning. Is the kids marching between those 2 rooms up there.
At 12:30 to 3 o'clock in the morning.
That's when I get home, and that's when I would see them.
The world kept turning while inside, time stood still. The children whispered to each other in the dark, too weak to cry loudly, too afraid to call for help. Their voices were swallowed by the silence of the house. It was suffering that seemed endless. And yet, Within that silence, one girl was finding her courage. One sister who refused to accept that this was her fate. One daughter who looked at the chains, the hunger, the silence, and said to herself, "This cannot be my life." Her name was Jordan, and soon she would change everything. By the time she turned 17, Jordan Turpin had lived her entire life in fear. Chains, hunger, silence, darkness. She saw her brothers and sisters wasting away, faces pale, bodies frail, eyes filled with hopelessness. Some were tied to their beds, the heavy clink of chains echoing through the night. Others lay on filthy mattresses, too weak to stand, whispering in secret about food they would never taste. Jordan knew one thing. If nothing changed, they would all die in that house. For her, it became a choice: escape or die here. She thought of her younger siblings, their bones visible under their skin. She thought of their cries, muffled so their parents wouldn't hear. She could not let them suffer forever. And so she made the decision, not just for herself, but for all 12 of her brothers and sisters. It was the early hours of January 14th, 2018. The house was dark, the parents asleep. Jordan had planned this moment in silence, going over it again and again in her mind. Her hands shook as she gripped an old cell phone, barely working, cracked, almost useless. But to her, it was the most powerful object she had ever held. She knew this was her only chance. Quietly, she walked to a window. She pushed it open, feeling the cold night air rush against her skin. For a second, she froze, terrified that the sound would wake her parents. But the house stayed silent. Heart pounding, she climbed out. Her feet hit the ground. She took one last look at the house, the prison that had stolen her childhood. And then she ran. The street was empty. The air was sharp and cold. Each step felt like it could be her last. Every sound, a dog barking, a car in the distance, felt like danger. She thought of her parents waking up, realizing she was gone, coming after her. Her chest tightened, her breath quickened, but she kept running. Jordan was free, for the first time in her life. But freedom meant nothing if she couldn't get help. She clutched the phone and dialed 911. The line clicked. A dispatcher's voice answered.
Jordan's voice trembled. She had never spoken to a stranger like this before. She had barely spoken to anyone outside her family. But now, her words meant life or death.
This is 911. Do you have an emergency?
I just went away from home because I live in a family of 15, okay?
There was silence on the other end. Then the dispatcher asked questions. At first, they weren't sure if the call was real. A 17-year-old girl talking about chains and starvation. It sounded impossible. Jordan pushed through her fear. She described everything she had seen. The chains, the beatings, the hunger.
They hit us, they throw us across the room. They pull our hair, they yank out our hair. I have my two little sisters right now are chained up.
Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. She begged, pleaded, insisting this was real. That call was the first time the outside world heard the cries of the Turpin children. The dispatcher finally understood. This was not a prank. This was a rescue in the making. As Jordan waited for help to arrive, standing on the street alone, something happened that she would never forget. She took a deep breath. The air was crisp, clean, alive. It was nothing like the air inside the house, heavy with filth and rot. She looked around and saw grass, real green grass. For the first time, she let herself bend down, touch it, smell it. Later, in an interview, she would say,
and I was so excited because I could smell the air, I could smell the grass. I was like, How could heaven be better than this? Oh my gosh, this is so free. Like, this is life.
Back inside the house, her brothers and sisters waited in silence. They didn't know if Jordan had made it. They didn't know if she had been caught or if she would ever return. They only knew she was their last hope. For them, time slowed. Each second stretched like an eternity. If Jordan failed, they would pay the price. Punishments would be harsher. Chains would stay locked. The hunger would deepen. But Jordan did not fail. Within hours, police would arrive. Within hours, the world would see the truth behind the smiling photos. The Turpin family's secret was about to be exposed. And soon, the House of Horrors would no longer be hidden. And if this story moved you, don't forget to support our work. Hit the like button, subscribe, and share this video so more people can hear Jordan's story of survival. The more we spread these stories, the harder it becomes for abuse and cruelty to stay hidden behind closed doors. When the news of the House of Horrors broke, the world demanded justice, and justice would soon arrive. In 2019, David and Louise Turpin walked into a courtroom in Riverside County, California. They were no longer the controlling parents behind locked doors. They were defendants, facing charges of torture, child abuse, and false imprisonment. For the first time since their arrest, some of their children would stand in the same room as them. This time, the silence was broken. Prosecutors laid out the facts. 13 children starved and chained, beatings, neglect, and years of psychological abuse. A deliberate system of control that stripped them of food, hygiene, and education. The evidence was overwhelming. Such photos of shackles, filthy rooms, medical reports showing severe malnutrition. David and Louise at first denied the full scope, but as the details came forward, as the voices of their children grew louder, the truth was undeniable. Both parents pleaded guilty to multiple counts of torture, false imprisonment, and child cruelty. They faced life in prison. Then came the most powerful moment of the trial. The voices of the survivors. For years, these children were silenced. In that courtroom, they were finally heard. For the first time, David and Louise had to listen. No more commands, no more control. Just the raw truth from the children they had chained and starved. Some of the children shook as they spoke. Others stared directly at their parents, refusing to look away. The emotional climax of the trial was not the sentencing itself. It was the moment the children reclaimed their voices. They turned years of silence into words that would echo far beyond the courtroom. The judge addressed David and Louise directly. He spoke of cruelty, of betrayal, of unimaginable suffering. He told them they had robbed their children of the basic joys of life: food, freedom, childhood itself. Then came the sentence: life in prison, with the possibility of parole only after 25 years. For the Turpin children, it was justice. Not enough to erase the scars, but enough to ensure their abusers could never hurt them again. Outside the courtroom, the story was carried by every major network in America. Headlines spoke of resilience, of courage, of a family that endured the unimaginable. For the children, the trial was not an ending. It was a beginning. They had stepped out of the shadows, spoken their truth, and seen justice served. The years of silence were over. One survivor said later in an interview,
I just want to thank them for teaching me about God and faith. I hope that they never lose their faith.
The trial of David and Louise Turpin was more than a legal process. It was a reckoning. It was the moment the children's voices replaced years of silence. Their words became their weapons. Their strength became their shield. For the first time in their lives, the children of the Turpin family were not prisoners, not victims, but survivors, standing together, telling the world, "We are free." The nightmare was finally over. David and Louise were gone, sentenced to spend the rest of their lives in prison. For the 13 Turpin children, The doors of their prison open for the first time. But freedom didn't feel like joy right away. It felt like shock. They stepped into a world they didn't understand. A world filled with things they had only heard about, but never touched. Cell phones, computers, cars speeding past on wide roads, grocery stores with shelves stacked with food, parks full of people laughing and playing. For most of us, these are ordinary sights. For the Turpin children, they were overwhelming. They didn't know how to cross a street safely. They didn't know how to buy groceries. Some didn't know how to use a fork, or how to choose what to eat when given options. The question hung over them: how do you start living when your entire life has been stolen? Education was another challenge. Many of them could barely read or write. Some, though teenagers, struggled with the alphabet. They didn't know history, math, or geography. The years of stolen schooling had left them behind, and now they faced the challenge of catching up in a world that moved fast. Everyday life, something most children take for granted, had to be built from scratch for the Turpins. Among the siblings, two voices began to rise: Jordan, the girl who made the escape, and Jennifer, her older sister. They became symbols of resilience, not just within their family, but to the outside world. In interviews, they shared glimpses of their new lives. They didn't shy away from the trauma, but they also didn't let it define them. Jennifer spoke with quiet strength.
We're not victims. We are survivors.
Jordan, the one who dialed 911 and saved them all, talked about why she chose to speak out publicly. She said she wanted to be a voice for others trapped in silence.
I told myself, if my story can help even one person escape abuse, then it's worth sharing.
One by one, the Turpin children began to build new lives. They attended school, they got jobs, they formed friendships. They learned what it meant to laugh without fear, to eat without guilt, to walk outside without chains. Those small steps, walking in a park, learning to drive, cooking a meal, became milestones of healing, each one a victory. The siblings, once voiceless, were now speaking for themselves.
Helped plan the
Done as
escape,
prisoners,
the oldest
but
Turpin
as
child,
survivors.
Jennifer, now
The emotional
33.
climax of their
How
aftermath
are you?
is not in the pain they endured, but in the
Doing
strength
really
they
good.
discovered. The story of the Turpin family is one of the darkest chapters in recent American history. 13 children hidden in plain sight, living in chains, starving, silenced. But it is also the story of courage. Jordan, the 17-year-old girl who risked everything with one phone call, changed the course of her family's life. From a trembling voice on the line with 911 to a young woman who now stands in front of cameras, speaking out, Jordan became the symbol of hope. Her siblings, once voiceless, are no longer defined by what was done to them. They are building new lives, step by step, learning, growing, surviving. And their message is clear. Even when everything has been taken away, resilience can be found. Even in the darkest house, a single act of bravery can bring the light. In the darkest places, even the smallest act of courage can change everything. This is not just their story, it's a reminder for all of us to pay attention, to speak up, to never ignore the signs of abuse around us. If this story moved you, help us share it. Click like, subscribe to the channel, and share this video so more people can learn the truth behind the House of Horrors. The more these stories are told, the harder it becomes for abuse and cruelty to stay hidden.